Around 7 million years ago in the forests and grasslands of Africa, several populations of apes began following an evolutionary course that would eventually produce human beings. Their descendants developed an increasingly upright gait, freeing their hands for carrying food, manipulating objects, and making tools. Among the best-known early hominins were the Australopithecines, who lived between roughly 4 million and 2 million years ago. They had brains little larger than those of modern apes, yet their skeletons showed that they routinely walked on two legs. The genus Homo appeared in Africa more than 2 million years ago. Early humans, such as Homo habilis, produced simple stone tools by striking flakes from carefully selected rocks. Homo erectus, which emerged around 2 million years ago, possessed a larger brain, a body suited to long-distance walking, and a far greater geographical range. Populations of Homo erectus and related humans spread beyond Africa into Western and Eastern Asia. Some reached the Indonesian islands, while others occupied the colder regions of Europe and Northern Asia. These early humans learned to use fire, though the date of its regular control remains uncertain. Fire provided warmth, protection from predators, light after sunset, and a means of cooking food. Cooking softened meat and plants, reduced the danger of parasites, and allowed the body to obtain more energy from meals. Cooperative hunting and food sharing encouraged increasingly complex social bonds. Knowledge had to pass from one generation to the next through demonstration, memory, and spoken communication. Homo sapiens emerged in Africa around 300,000 years ago. The earliest members of our species already possess many features associated with modern humanity, though human anatomy and behavior developed gradually across many populations. Africa contains several interconnected groups whose members sometimes separated, mixed, and migrated over long periods. Modern humans arose from this broad African population rather than from a single isolated tribe. Other human species occupied Eurasia. Neanderthals lived across Europe and Western Asia, adapting to climates that ranged from temperate woodland to Ice Age steppe. They made sophisticated stone tools, hunted large animals, cared for injured companions, used pigments, and buried at least some of their dead. Denisovans, known mainly through genetic evidence and a small number of fossils, occupied parts of Asia. Modern humans later interbred with both Neanderthals and Denisovans. Many people living today carry small percentages of DNA inherited from these encounters. Groups of Homo sapiens began leaving Africa in substantial numbers more than 60,000 years ago, although earlier migrations had already occurred. They spread along the coasts and river valleys of southern Asia, reached Australia more than 50,000 years ago, and gradually occupied Europe and northern Asia. Their success rested on adaptability. They made tools from stone, bone, antler, and wood. They sewed fitted clothing, built shelters, navigated unfamiliar terrain, and maintained social contacts across considerable distances. Human beings of the Upper Paleolithic created some of the earliest surviving figurative art. Caves in Europe preserve paintings of horses, bison, lions, mammoths, and human figures. Carved objects and painted rock shelters appear across Africa, Asia, and Australia. These images show technical skill and symbolic thought, though their exact meanings remain unknown. Some may have been connected with ritual, storytelling, hunting traditions, social identity, or several of these purposes at once. Religion cannot be reconstructed in detail from prehistoric remains, yet burial practices and ceremonial objects suggest that ancient people developed ideas about death, unseen powers, ancestors, and the structure of the world. Human communities maintained shared stories and customs long before writing. Language allowed each generation to inherit accumulated experience instead of beginning again with only instinct and observation. During the Ice Age, much of the world's water was locked in glaciers. Sea levels were lower, exposing land that is now submerged. Human groups reached the Americas by at least 15,000 years ago, possibly earlier, through routes connected with northeastern Asia. Some crossed the region of Beringia, which joined Siberia and Alaska, while coastal travel may also have played a part. Within a few thousand years, people had spread from the Arctic to the southern end of South America. These communities entered continents filled with mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, horses, camels, and other large animals. Many of these species disappeared near the end of the Ice Age. Climate change transformed their habitats, while human hunting added further pressure. The extent of each cause varied by region. The last great glacial period ended around 9,700 BC. Temperatures rose, glaciers retreated, and rainfall patterns shifted. Forests expanded into former grasslands. Some large herds declined or moved northward. Human communities responded by gathering a wider variety of plants, hunting smaller animals, fishing, and settling for longer periods in favored locations. Agriculture developed independently in several parts of the world. In the Fertile Crescent, communities began cultivating wheat, barley, lentils, and peas while managing sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs. In China, people domesticated millet in the north and rice in the south. Farmers in New Guinea cultivated root crops. African communities domesticated sorghum, pearl millet, and other plants. Mesoamerican agriculture eventually centered on maize, beans, and squash. In the Andes, people cultivated potatoes and quinoa and raised llamas and alpacas. The transition to farming unfolded slowly. Many communities combined cultivation with hunting and gathering for centuries. Some groups rejected agriculture or adopted only selected elements. Farming demanded intense labor and exposed people to crop failures, yet it could support larger populations on a smaller area of land. Stored grain allowed communities to survive seasonal shortages and also created possessions that could be guarded, exchanged, taxed, or stolen. Permanent villages appeared before full agricultural dependence in some regions. Jericho, near the Jordan River, developed into a substantial settlement by the 9th millennium BC. Its inhabitants built stone walls and a large tower whose exact purpose remains disputed. Catalhoyuk in Anatolia, occupied mainly during the 7th millennium BC, consisted of tightly packed mud brick houses entered through their roofs. Its people farmed, herded livestock, hunted wild animals, traded obsidian, and decorated rooms with paintings and modeled reliefs. Village life altered human health. Dense settlements allowed infectious diseases to spread more easily. Close contact with domesticated animals exposed people to new pathogens. Diets sometimes became less varied, and skeletal remains often show signs of nutritional stress. At the same time, settled communities could support more children, preserve food, build stronger shelters, and develop specialized crafts. Property and inheritance became more significant. Households controlled fields, animals, stored food, tools, and buildings. Differences in wealth became more visible. Some graves contained valuable objects, while others remained plain. Leaders organized irrigation, settled disputes, directed warfare, and supervised ceremonies. Religious authority and political power often reinforced one another. Pottery allowed people to store grain, carry water, cook stews, and preserve food. Weaving produced cloth from flax, wool, and other fibers. Polished stone axes cleared woodland for cultivation. Communities mined flint, obsidian, salt, and pigments, distributing them through trade networks that extended far beyond individual settlements. Copper working began in several regions during the Neolithic and Chalcolithic periods. Craftsmen discovered that copper could be shaped, melted, and cast. When combined with tin or certain other metals, it produced bronze, which was harder and more reliable. Bronze technology eventually transformed warfare, agriculture, craftsmanship, and long-distance trade. Tin was relatively scarce, forcing states and merchants to maintain trade connections across great distances. The wheel appeared in Western Eurasia during the 4th millennium BC, first in transport and perhaps around the same period in pottery production. Wheeled carts made it easier to move heavy goods across suitable ground. Pastoral peoples of the Eurasian steppe used cattle, sheep, goats, and eventually horses to exploit broad grasslands that offered limited opportunities for farming. Their mobility connected distant regions and sometimes brought them into conflict with settled populations. By the late 4th millennium BC, southern Mesopotamia had become one of the world's earliest urban societies. The region lay between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now Iraq. Rainfall was limited, yet irrigation channels carried river water into fields. These systems required constant maintenance. Silt had to be removed, embankments repaired, and water divided among competing communities. The Sumerian cities of Uruk, Ur, Eridu, Lagash, Kish, and others grew around temples, workshops, markets, and administrative centers. Uruk may have held tens of thousands of inhabitants by the late 4th millennium BC. Its monumental buildings required organized labor and large supplies of food and materials. Priests, officials, merchants, soldiers, craftsmen, farmers, and laborers occupied different positions within an increasingly stratified society. Writing developed in Mesopotamia from systems of accounting. Administrators used clay tokens and impressed symbols to record grain, livestock, labor, and goods. By around 3200 BC, scribes were inscribing signs on clay tablets. Over time, these signs developed into cuneiform, a script made with a wedge-shaped reed stylus. Writing expanded beyond accounts to laws, royal inscriptions, diplomatic letters, hymns, myths, mathematical exercises, and literature. The earlier states preserved older village customs while creating new institutions. Temples owned land and managed herds. Palaces collected tribute and employed officials. Kings claimed divine favor and portrayed military victories as proof of their rightful authority. City walls protected populations from raiders and rival armies. Warfare became more organized, supported by taxes, stored grain, metal weapons, and trained soldiers. Sumerian city-states shared language, religion, and cultural traditions. Yet they frequently fought one another over land, canals, trade routes, and political dominance. A king might gain temporary control over neighboring cities, but local independence usually returned after his death. This pattern of competition encouraged military innovation and monumental building, while consuming enormous resources. Sumerian religion envisioned a universe governed by many gods associated with cities, natural forces, crafts, and human activities. People maintained the gods through offerings and temple rituals. Floods, droughts, disease, and defeat could be interpreted as signs of divine displeasure. The gods were powerful and unpredictable, while human beings occupied a dependent position within the cosmic order. The stories later collected in the Epic of Gilgamesh grew from Sumerian poems about a legendary king of Uruk. The epic follows Gilgamesh through kingship, friendship, grief, and his failed search for immortality. Its flood account resembles other Mesopotamian traditions and reflects the dangers of life beside great rivers. The work changed over centuries as scribes translated and adapted it. Egyptian civilization developed along the Nile. Each summer, rains far to the south caused the river to rise, depositing fertile silt across its floodplain. The regular cycle of inundation supported agriculture and made dense settlement possible within a narrow strip surrounded by desert. The desert limited large-scale invasion and preserved many tombs and settlements, though Egypt maintained regular contacts with Nubia, Libya, the Levant, and the Red Sea. Upper and Lower Egypt were united around 3100 BC, traditionally under a ruler called Menes, and often associated by historians with King Narmer. The Egyptian king, later known as the pharaoh, occupied the center of the state. He acted as ruler, military leader, chief priest, and guarantor of order. Officials collected taxes, measured fields, organized labor, and supervised royal estates. Egyptian hieroglyphic writing appeared around the time of unification. Scribes also developed more practical cursive forms for administrative use. Papyrus provided a light writing surface, though stone inscriptions and wooden tablets also remained common. Literacy belonged mainly to scribes, priests, and officials. Their records supported a centralized bureaucracy that could move resources across the length of the Nile Valley. During the Old Kingdom, which began around 2686 BC, pharaohs constructed immense royal tombs. The step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara was followed by the pyramids of Sneferu and the Great Pyramids at Giza. The Great Pyramid of Khufu required careful surveying, skilled engineering, quarrying, transport, and organized labor on an enormous scale. Archaeological evidence shows that much of the workforce consisted of laborers supported by the state, including seasonal workers who served when the Nile flood reduced agricultural activity. Egyptian religion placed great emphasis on death and renewal. Preservation of the body through mummification reflected beliefs about continued existence after death. Tombs contained food, furniture, clothing, tools, and ritual texts. These provisions were intended to sustain the deceased, though their richness depended heavily on status. Royal funerary customs gradually influenced wider sections of society. The Old Kingdom weakened after about 2200 BC. Provincial governors became more independent. Royal authority declined, and environmental instability may have contributed to poor floods and food shortages. Egypt entered the first intermediate period when competing dynasties controlled different regions. Later rulers from Thebes reunited the country and established the Middle Kingdom around 2055 BC. The Middle Kingdom expanded irrigation, strengthened administration, and extended Egyptian power into Nubia. Literature from this period explored kingship, disorder, loyalty, and personal conduct. Egyptian rulers presented themselves as protectors responsible for justice and the defense of the weak, although the actual society remained hierarchical and depended heavily on peasant labor. Farther south, Nubian communities developed their own political and cultural traditions. The kingdom of Kerma became a major power in the second millennium BC. Nubia controlled valuable trade in gold, ivory, ebony, animal products, and goods from Central Africa. Egypt alternated between commerce, military expansion, and defensive construction along its southern frontier. In the Indus Valley, large cities emerged around 2600 BC. Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dholavira, and other settlements belonged to a civilization spread across much of present-day Pakistan and northwestern India. Their cities contained planned streets, standardized bricks, drainage systems, wells, workshops, and large public buildings. Standardized weights point to regulated trade and administration. The Indus script remains undeciphered, limiting knowledge of its government and beliefs. No royal tombs or obvious palaces comparable to those of Egypt and Mesopotamia have been identified. Authority may have been distributed among urban elites, merchants, landholders, or religious institutions. Indus merchants traded with communities around the Persian Gulf and Mesopotamia, where their homeland was probably known as Meluha. In Eastern Asia, farming communities along the Yellow and Yangtze rivers developed increasingly complex settlements. Millet supported societies in northern China, while rice cultivation expanded in the south. Communities produced fine pottery, jade ornaments, silk, and tools of stone and bone. Fortified settlements and rich burials show that warfare and social hierarchy had become established well before the first securely documented Chinese dynasties. Sargon of Akkad created the first durable territorial empire in Mesopotamia around 2334 BC. Rising from uncertain origins, he conquered Sumerian cities and extended his authority across much of Mesopotamia. Akkadian, a Semitic language, became prominent in government alongside Sumerian. Sargon and his successors appointed governors, stationed troops, collected tribute, and promoted a royal ideology that reached beyond the traditional city-state. The Akkadian Empire weakened after about 2 centuries. Internal rebellion, conflict over succession, external attacks, and environmental strain all contributed. Later Sumerian rulers established the third dynasty of Ur around 2112 BC. The kings of Ur created an exceptionally detailed bureaucracy. Surviving tablets record labor assignments, rations, taxes, livestock, agricultural production, and legal transactions. During the early 2nd millennium BC, Amorite dynasties gained control of many Mesopotamian cities. Babylon rose under Hammurabi, who ruled from about 1792 to 1750 BC. His conquest created a kingdom covering much of Mesopotamia, though it fragmented after his death. Hammurabi is best known for the law collection inscribed on a stone monument. The text contains judgments concerning property, trade, marriage, inheritance, injury, slavery, wages, and professional responsibility. Punishments varied according to social status. The collection presented the king as a guardian of justice and offers a detailed picture of social relations, though courts also relied on custom and individual rulings. Merchants from the city of Ashur established trading colonies in Anatolia. Thousands of clay tablets found at Kanesh record loans, partnerships, marriage agreements, disputes, and the transport of textiles and silver. These documents reveal commercial families operating over generations and across hundreds of miles. Women managed households, represented family businesses, and participated in textile production and trade. Egypt experienced another period of political division during the 17th century BC. A foreign dynasty known as the Hyksos ruled much of the Nile Delta. They originated from Western Asia and adopted many Egyptian customs. Their armies used horse-drawn chariots and composite bows, weapons that became central to later Egyptian warfare. Rulers from Thebes eventually expelled them and founded the New Kingdom around 1550 BC. New Kingdom Egypt became an imperial power. Pharaohs campaigned into the Levant and deep into Nubia, securing tribute, trade routes, captives, and access to gold. Thutmose III fought repeated campaigns in Syria and Palestine. Egyptian garrisons and allied local rulers maintained influence across the region. Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's most successful female rulers, governed as pharaoh during the 15th century BC. She adopted the full symbols and titles of kingship, sponsored major construction, and promoted an expedition to the land of Punt, probably located around the Red Sea and Horn of Africa. Her monuments portrayed her reign as divinely ordained and politically stable. Akhenaten, who ruled in the 14th century BC, elevated the solar deity Aten and reduced the public position of other gods, especially Amun. He founded a new capital at Akhetaten, now Amarna. His religious program depended heavily on royal authority and did not survive him. Tutankhamun and later rulers restored traditional cults. The discovery of Tutankhamun's largely intact tomb in the 20th century made him famous, though his own reign was brief. The Amarna letters, diplomatic tablets written mainly in Akkadian, reveal an international system linking Egypt, Babylonia, Assyria, the Hittites, Mitanni, Cyprus, and numerous Levantine states. Kings exchanged gifts, arranged marriages, complained about inferior treatment, and addressed one another as brothers. Beneath this formal equality, each ruler competed for prestige, resources, and influence. The Hittite kingdom arose in central Anatolia. Hittite rulers expanded into Syria and challenged Egyptian interests. Their state combined a powerful monarchy with treaties that defined relations among vassals, allies, and members of the royal family. Hittite scribes preserved texts in several languages, including diplomatic agreements, laws, rituals, myths, and military records. Ramses II fought the Hittites at Kadesh around 1274 BC. Egyptian monuments presented the battle as a heroic triumph, while the wider evidence suggests an indecisive encounter. Neither side gained lasting supremacy. Egypt and the Hittite Empire later concluded a peace treaty and sealed their relationship through royal marriage. Across the Aegean, the Minoan civilization flourished on Crete during the 2nd millennium BC. Centers such as Knossos contained large architectural complexes with storerooms, workshops, courts, and decorated rooms. Minoan traders participated in networks connecting the Aegean with Egypt and Western Asia. Their script, Linear A, remains undeciphered. Mycenaean civilization developed on the Greek mainland. Fortified centers at Mycenae, Tiryns, Pylos, and Thebes were ruled by warrior elites. Their scribes used Linear B, an early form of Greek, to record palace goods, landholdings, religious offerings, and labor. Mycenaean rulers maintained chariots, bronze weapons, ships, and networks of dependent settlements. The later Greek stories of the Trojan War may preserve distant memories of conflict between Mycenaean powers and communities in western Anatolia. Archaeology confirms that Troy was repeatedly destroyed and rebuilt, though it cannot verify the characters or exact events described by Homer. The Iliad and Odyssey reached their surviving forms centuries after the Bronze Age, shaped by generations of oral performance. Around 1200 BC, the political systems of the Eastern Mediterranean entered a period of widespread destruction. Mycenaean palaces burned, the Hittite state disappeared. Cities in the Levant were destroyed or abandoned, and Egypt fought invading groups called Sea Peoples in its inscriptions. Trade contracted, writing vanished from Greece for several centuries, and populations declined in many areas. No single cause explains these events: warfare, rebellion, drought, famine, migration, political rivalry, and the weakness of highly centralized palace economies combined in different ways. Bronze Age states depended on long supply chains, specialized production, tribute, and royal administration. Once several major centers failed, the disruption spread through the network. Egypt survived but lost most of its Asian empire and entered a long decline. New political communities emerged in the Levant and Aegean. Iron gradually replaced bronze for many tools and weapons. Early iron was difficult to produce, though its raw materials were more widely available than tin. Improved techniques eventually made ironworking common throughout much of Eurasia and Africa. Phoenician cities such as Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos became major maritime centers. Their merchants sailed throughout the Mediterranean, establishing trading settlements in Cyprus, North Africa, Sicily, Sardinia, and Spain. They exported timber, purple dye, glassware, metalwork, and luxury goods. The writing system used a compact set of consonantal signs and influenced the Greek alphabet, which later contributed to Latin and many other scripts. Carthage, founded by Phoenician settlers on the North African coast, developed into a powerful state. Its position near the central Mediterranean allowed it to control sea routes and commercial networks. Carthaginian society included wealthy merchant families, landowners, craftsmen, farmers, sailors, and subject peoples. Elected magistrates and councils governed alongside an assembly, though prominent families dominated political life. The peoples, later known as Israelites, emerged in the highlands of Canaan during the early Iron Age. Their origins involve local Canaanite populations and perhaps smaller groups carrying traditions of migration, bondage, and escape from Egypt. Over time, they developed a distinct identity centered on devotion to the god Yahweh, shared laws, ancestral traditions, and ties to the land. The Hebrew Bible presents Saul, David, and Solomon as kings of a united monarchy. Archaeological and historical debate continues over the size and power of their kingdom. By the 9th century BC, two states clearly existed, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. Israel was larger and wealthier, while Judah centered on Jerusalem. The Neo-Assyrian Empire became the dominant power of Western Asia. Assyrian kings built a highly organized military state supported by taxation, tribute, deportation, and provincial government. Their armies used infantry, cavalry, chariots, siege engines, engineers, and specialized units. Royal inscriptions described campaigns in brutal language intended to intimidate opponents and glorify the king. Assyrian rulers moved conquered populations throughout the empire. Deportation punished rebellion, supplied labor, and weakened local resistance. These movements also spread languages, skills, and customs. Aramaic became a common language of communication across much of Western Asia. The Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC and deported part of its population. Judah survived as a vassal. Jerusalem resisted an Assyrian invasion under King Hezekiah in 701 BC, though much of the surrounding country was devastated. Assyrian records and biblical accounts describe the campaign from different perspectives. Assyrian kings collected texts, specimens, artworks, and tribute from across their territories. Ashurbanipal established a great library at Nineveh containing literary, religious, medical, astronomical, and administrative works. The tablets preserve versions of the Epic of Gilgamesh and many other Mesopotamian compositions. Assyria's power collapsed late in the 7th century BC. Civil war weakened the dynasty while Babylonians and Medes attacked its cities. Nineveh fell in 612 BC. The Neo-Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II later conquered Judah, destroyed Jerusalem and its temple in 586 BC, and deported many Judeans to Babylonia. The exile transformed Jewish religious thought and community organization, strengthening the role of scripture, law, and collective memory. In the Nile Valley, Nubian rulers based at Napata conquered Egypt during the 8th century BC and established the 25th dynasty. They respected Egyptian religious traditions and presented themselves as restorers of proper kingship. Assyrian invasions eventually drove them south. Their successors ruled the kingdom of Kush from centers that later included Meroe, where ironworking, long-distance commerce, and a distinctive written language developed. After the decline of the Indus cities around 1900 BC, South Asia entered a period of regional change. Urban centers contracted, trade networks shifted, and populations moved eastward. Indo-Aryan-speaking groups entered the northwest over several centuries and mixed with existing communities. Their religious hymns were preserved orally and later collected in the Vedas. Early Vedic society centered on cattle herding, agriculture, sacrifice, kinship, and warrior leadership. Over time, kingdoms expanded along the Ganges. Social categories known as varnas placed priests, warriors, commoners, and laboring groups within a religious hierarchy. Actual social life was more complex, with many occupations, tribes, local communities, and later hereditary castes. Vedic religion emphasized fire sacrifice, sacred speech, and reciprocal relations between humans and gods. Later thinkers explored the relationship between individual existence, moral action, rebirth, and ultimate reality. The Upanishads developed concepts such as karma, samsara, atman, and brahman. These ideas influenced the many traditions later grouped under the broad label of Hinduism. In China, the Shang dynasty ruled parts of the Yellow River region during the 2nd millennium BC. Shang kings directed warfare, sacrifices, agriculture, and the production of bronze vessels. They consulted ancestors through divination. Questions were inscribed on animal bones or turtle shells, heated until they cracked, and interpreted by specialists. These oracle bone inscriptions provide the earliest substantial body of Chinese writing. Shang bronze casting reached a remarkable level of technical skill. Workshops produced ritual vessels decorated with complex designs. Bronze objects displayed wealth, supported ceremonies, and reinforced the authority of royal and aristocratic families. Human and animal sacrifices accompanied some elite burials. The Zhou conquered the Shang around 1045 BC. Zhou rulers justified their victory through the mandate of heaven. According to this principle, heaven granted authority to a virtuous dynasty and withdrew support from rulers who became oppressive or incompetent. Rebellion and conquest could therefore receive moral justification after success. Early Zhou kings distributed lands and offices among relatives and allies. These regional lords gradually gained independence. By the 8th century BC, royal power had weakened, and warfare among states became frequent. The spring and autumn period produced shifting alliances, reforms, and competition for skilled officials. Greek-speaking communities recovered from the fall of the Mycenaean palaces during the centuries after 1100 BC. Population eventually increased, trade revived, and new settlements appeared. Greeks adopted and modified the Phoenician alphabet, adding signs for vowels. Alphabetic literacy allowed poetry, laws, dedications, accounts, and public decrees to be recorded with relative ease. The basic Greek political community was the polis, a self-governing city and its surrounding territory. Each polis had its own institutions, laws, cults, and civic identity. Mountain ranges and islands encouraged political fragmentation, while the sea connected Greek settlements through commerce and colonization. From the 8th to the 6th centuries BC, Greek settlers founded cities around the Mediterranean and Black Sea. Colonies appeared in southern Italy, Sicily, North Africa, southern France, Spain, and the shores of the Black Sea. These communities maintained religious and cultural ties with their founding cities, but usually governed themselves. Colonization expanded trade in grain, timber, metals, wine, olive oil, pottery, and slaves. It also brought Greeks into contact with Egyptians, Phoenicians, Etruscans, Scythians, and many other peoples. Greek art and thought absorbed foreign techniques and ideas while developing distinctive forms. Warfare increasingly centered on hoplites, heavily armed infantrymen who fought in close formation. A hoplite carried a large shield, spear, helmet, and body armor. Discipline and cohesion mattered more than individual heroics. Citizens, wealthy enough to equip themselves, gained greater political influence in many cities. Sparta developed a militarized social system after conquering neighboring Messenia. The conquered Hellas worked the land and delivered produce to Spartan citizens. Fear of revolt shaped Spartan institutions. Male citizens underwent a state-directed upbringing and spent much of their adult lives training and dining in military groups. Sparta maintained 2 hereditary kings alongside magistrates and councils. Athens passed through monarchy, aristocratic rule, tyranny, and constitutional reform. Social conflict over debt, land, and political exclusion led to the reforms of Solon in the early 6th century BC. He cancelled certain debts, ended debt slavery for Athenians, reorganized political participation by wealth, and created broader legal rights. The tyrant Pisistratus and his sons later controlled Athens while preserving many existing institutions. After their removal, Cleisthenes reorganized the citizen body around local districts and established the Council of 500. These reforms weakened older clan loyalties and laid the institutional foundations of Athenian democracy. Participation remained limited to adult male citizens. Women, resident foreigners, and slaves had no vote. Even within those boundaries, the direct role of ordinary citizens in legislation, courts, and public office was exceptional in the ancient world. Large juries chosen from citizens decided trials, and many offices were assigned by lot. In Western Asia, the Persians rose under Cyrus II. Around 550 BC, Cyrus overthrew the Median king and began a series of conquests. He defeated Lydia in Anatolia, absorbed much of Central Asia, and captured Babylon in 539 BC. His empire stretched from the Aegean region toward the borders of India. Cyrus allowed many conquered communities to maintain local religions and customs. Babylonian records present him as a ruler chosen by the city's god Marduk. Judean exiles were permitted to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. This policy encouraged cooperation, though Persian rule still rested on military power, taxation, and royal authority. Cambyses, the son of Cyrus, conquered Egypt in 525 BC. Darius I later secured the throne after a period of rebellion. Darius divided the empire into provinces governed by satraps, standardized tribute, improved roads, and issued coinage. Royal inspectors and separate military commanders limited the independence of provincial governors. The Persian royal road linked western Anatolia with the imperial centers farther east. Relay stations allowed official messages to move rapidly. Imperial Aramaic became a common administrative language. Persian kings drew soldiers, officials, laborers, and resources from many peoples while presenting themselves as rulers of a divinely ordered world. Persian religion drew heavily from Iranian traditions associated with Ahura Mazda and teachings linked to Zarathustra, though the precise beliefs of individual kings remained debated. Royal inscriptions emphasized truth, order, and loyalty, while condemning rebellion as falsehood. Persian expansion into the Aegean brought the empire into conflict with Greek cities. Ionian Greek communities in western Anatolia rebelled in 499 BC with limited assistance from Athens and Eretria. Darius crushed the revolt and later sent forces across the Aegean. The Athenians defeated a Persian army at Marathon in 490 BC. Xerxes launched a much larger invasion 10 years later. His army crossed the Hellespont and advanced through northern Greece. A small Greek force led by the Spartan king Leonidas resisted at Thermopylae before being surrounded and destroyed. Athens was evacuated and burned. The Greek fleet defeated the Persians in the Straits of Salamis. Xerxes withdrew much of his force, leaving an army that was defeated at Plataea in 479 BC. Persian power remained immense, and the empire continued to influence Greek affairs through diplomacy, subsidies, and intervention. Athens converted a wartime alliance, later called the Delian League, into an empire. Member states contributed ships or money for continued operations against Persia. Athens moved the League treasury to the Acropolis and used its resources for military power and public construction. Attempts to withdraw were often suppressed. Under Pericles, Athenian democracy expanded payment for public service, allowing poorer citizens to participate more fully. The city constructed the Parthenon and other major buildings. Dramatists, including Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes, wrote works performed at public religious festivals. Their plays examined law, war, family duty, ambition, suffering, and relations between mortals and gods. Greek thinkers sought natural explanations for the universe. Earlier philosophers proposed that matter and change could be understood through reason, rather than solely through myth. Herodotus investigated the causes and customs surrounding the Persian Wars, while Thucydides analyzed strategy, political decisions, and human conduct during the Peloponnesian War. Socrates questioned Athenians about virtue, knowledge, and justice. He wrote nothing himself, and his teachings survived mainly through others, especially Plato. Convicted of impiety and corrupting the young, he was executed in 399 BC. Plato founded the Academy and explored politics, ethics, knowledge, and metaphysics through philosophical dialogues. Aristotle later studied logic, biology, ethics, politics, poetry, and many other subjects, combining observation with systematic classification. Competition between Athens and Sparta led to the Peloponnesian War in 431 BC. Athens possessed naval power and financial resources, while Sparta led a formidable land alliance. The conflict lasted, with interruptions, for nearly 3 decades. Plague killed a large part of the Athenian population, including Pericles. Athens suffered a catastrophic defeat after invading Sicily. Persian support then helped Sparta build a navy. Athens surrendered in 404 BC. Spartan supremacy proved brief. Continued warfare weakened the major Greek states and encouraged Persian interference. In the western Mediterranean, Etruscan cities flourished in central Italy. The Etruscans were skilled metalworkers, traders, farmers, engineers, and builders. Their culture influenced early Rome in religion, political symbols, architecture, and public ceremony. Greek colonies in southern Italy and Sicily also shaped the peninsula through trade and settlement. Rome developed beside the Tiber River, near routes linking inland Italy with the coast. Archaeology shows several hilltop communities gradually combining into an urban center. Roman tradition dated the city's foundation to 753 BCE and described a succession of 7 kings. These stories contain legend, though Rome probably was ruled by kings during its early development. Roman society was organized around households, clans, patronage, property, and military service. The Senate began as a council of leading men. Religious offices regulated relations with the gods through sacrifice, divination, and public ritual. Roman religion placed great value on correct procedure and inherited custom. According to tradition, the last king was expelled in 509 BC and replaced by annually elected magistrates. The early republic was dominated by patrician families. Plebeians gradually gained legal and political rights through a long series of social conflicts. The 12 Tables, compiled in the 5th century BC, publicly recorded basic legal principles. Consuls led the state and commanded armies. Praetors administered justice. Censors conducted the census and supervised membership in the Senate. Assemblies elected officials and passed laws, while the Senate directed finances, diplomacy, and long-term policy. Tribunes of the plebs could protect citizens and block official actions. Rome fought neighboring Latins, Etruscans, Sabines, and mountain peoples. Roman expansion combined warfare with alliance building. Defeated communities received different levels of citizenship and obligation. Some supplied troops while keeping local institutions. Colonies secured strategic territory. This flexible system gave Rome access to manpower far beyond the population of the city itself. In northern India, the 6th and 5th centuries BC saw the growth of large states known as Mahajanapadas. Cities expanded, coinage became more common, and merchants traveled along regional trade routes. New religious movements questioned the authority of hereditary priests and the value of elaborate sacrifice. Siddhartha Gautama, later called the Buddha, taught that suffering arose from craving and ignorance. Ethical conduct, meditation, and insight offered release from the cycle of rebirth. He organized a monastic community while teaching lay followers. Buddhism spread through preaching, patronage, trade, and the establishment of monasteries. Mahavira taught a path later associated with Jainism. Jain doctrine emphasized non-violence, self-control, truthfulness, and liberation from rebirth. Monks and nuns followed strict discipline, while lay communities supported them and adapted these principles to household life. In China, prolonged warfare encouraged intense debate about government and morality. Confucius, who lived from 551 to 479 BC, taught that social order depended on ethical conduct, education, proper relationships, and rulers who governed through virtue. He valued ritual and inherited traditions as means of cultivating disciplined character. Later, Confucian thinkers disagreed over human nature and the best methods of government. Mencius argued that people possessed natural tendencies toward goodness. Xunzi considered human desires disorderly and emphasized education, ritual, and conscious effort. Taoist texts associated with Laozi and Zhuangzi questioned rigid social ambition and artificial conventions. They praised simplicity, flexibility, and alignment with the Tao, the underlying way of nature. Legalist thinkers emphasized clear laws, strict rewards and punishments, centralized power, and administrative control. By the 5th century BC, the Warring States period had begun. States built large infantry armies, developed cavalry, constructed defensive walls, and expanded bureaucracies. Iron tools increased agricultural production. Governments registered households, taxed land, and promoted settlement in newly conquered areas. Macedonia rose under Philip II during the 4th century BC. Philip reorganized the army around a long pike called the sarissa, supported by cavalry, light troops, and siege engineers. Through diplomacy, marriage, bribery, and warfare, he gained control over much of Greece. His victory at Cheronea in 338 BC ended effective resistance from the major southern Greek states. Philip was assassinated in 336 BC and succeeded by his son Alexander. After suppressing revolts in Greece and the Balkans, Alexander invaded the Persian Empire. He defeated Darius III at the Granicus River, Issus, and Gaugamela. Egypt submitted, Babylon opened its gates, and Persian capitals were captured. Alexander continued east into Central Asia, where resistance required years of hard campaigning. He married Roxane, the daughter of a local noble, and recruited Iranian soldiers. His adoption of elements of Persian court ceremony angered some Macedonians who expected a king to behave as a military leader among companions. In 326 BC, Alexander crossed into the Punjab and defeated King Porus at the Hydaspes River. His exhausted soldiers refused to advance farther east. The army returned through the Indus Valley and the harsh Gedrosian desert. Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BC at the age of 32. His empire fragmented among his generals. The Ptolemies ruled Egypt, the Seleucids controlled much of Western Asia, and the Antigonids eventually held Macedonia. Other kingdoms arose in Anatolia, Central Asia, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Warfare among these dynasties continued for generations. Greek became a common language of administration, trade, scholarship, and elite culture across much of the Eastern Mediterranean and Western Asia. New cities attracted Macedonian and Greek settlers, local populations, merchants, soldiers, and officials. Cultural exchange moved in several directions. Greek institutions adapted to local conditions, while Greek settlers adopted regional customs, gods, art, and political practices. Alexandria in Egypt became one of the largest cities of the ancient world. The Ptolemies sponsored the Library and Museum, where scholars studied literature, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, geography, and engineering. Euclid organized geometry into a systematic body of proofs. Eratosthenes estimated the circumference of the Earth with impressive accuracy. Herophilus and Erasistratus advanced anatomical knowledge through dissection. Hellenistic engineers designed water pumps, siege weapons, mechanical devices, and complex machines. Archimedes studied geometry, buoyancy, levers, and mechanical advantage. Scientific work remained limited by available instruments and often depended on royal patronage. Yet it produced methods and texts that influenced later civilizations. Chandragupta Maurya established a great Indian empire around the end of the 4th century BC. He overthrew the Nanda dynasty, took control of northern India, and defeated Seleucid forces in the northwest. The resulting settlement transferred territory to the Mauryas and established diplomatic relations. The Mauryan state governed through provincial officials, taxation, roads, military forces, and royal agents. The Arthashastra, a political treatise associated with Kautilya, describes administration, intelligence gathering, diplomacy, taxation, and war. Its surviving form includes material from several periods, but it reflects a tradition of practical statecraft. Ashoka, Chandragupta's grandson, expanded the empire and conquered Kalinga. His inscriptions state that the suffering caused by the war led him to embrace a policy of moral governance influenced by Buddhism. He promoted non-violence, religious tolerance, public welfare, and respect for parents, teachers, ascetics, and servants. Ashoka communicated through inscriptions carved on rocks and pillars across the empire. These texts used several languages and scripts. He supported Buddhist institutions and helped the religion spread beyond India, though his government continued to function as an imperial monarchy with courts, taxes, officials, and punishments. In the western Mediterranean, Rome completed its conquest of the Italian peninsula during the 4th and early 3rd centuries BC. The Samnite Wars tested Roman endurance and exposed weaknesses in its military organization. Rome adapted its formations to the broken ground of central Italy and continued absorbing defeated communities into its alliance system. The Greek city of Tarentum called upon King Pyrrhus of Epirus for assistance against Rome. Pyrrhus won several costly battles but could not break the Roman Confederation. His eventual withdrawal left Rome dominant in southern Italy. Rome's expansion brought it into conflict with Carthage. The First Punic War began in 264 BC over Sicily. Rome had little experience in large-scale naval warfare, yet it built fleets, trained crews, and developed methods for boarding enemy ships. After more than 2 decades of heavy losses, Carthage surrendered Sicily. Carthage then expanded in Spain under the Barcid family. Hannibal, son of Hamilcar Barca, attacked the Roman allied city of Saguntum, beginning the Second Punic War in 218 BC. He led an army across the Alps into Italy with infantry, cavalry, and elephants. Hannibal defeated Roman armies at the Trebia River, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae. At Cannae in 216 BC, his smaller force surrounded and destroyed a much larger Roman army. Many communities in southern Italy defected, though Rome's central Italian alliance remained largely intact. Roman leaders avoided further battles on Hannibal's preferred terms. They raised new armies, attacked his allies, and extended the war into Spain. Roman manpower and political cohesion allowed the Republic to recover from losses that would have destroyed many ancient states. Scipio Africanus invaded North Africa and defeated Hannibal at Zama in 202 BC. Carthage lost its overseas territories, fleet, and military independence. Rome became the leading power of the Western Mediterranean. Roman armies then intervened more deeply in the Greek East. Macedonia was defeated. The Seleucid king, Antiochus III, was driven from much of Anatolia, and Greek states came under increasing Roman control. In 146 BC, Roman forces destroyed both Carthage and Corinth. The same year symbolized Rome's supremacy across the Mediterranean, though conquest continued in Spain and elsewhere. Expansion transformed Roman society. Conquered lands produced tribute, taxes, slaves, and opportunities for governors, contractors, merchants, and soldiers. Wealthy Romans acquired large estates. Enslaved laborers worked in agriculture, mines, households, workshops, and public projects. Some slaves earned or received freedom, but many endured harsh conditions and legal vulnerability. Small farmers faced long military service, debt, and competition from large estates. Soldiers returning from campaigns sometimes found their farms neglected or sold. Migration into Rome increased, creating a large urban population dependent on irregular work, patronage, and eventually subsidized grain. The brothers Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus attempted reforms in the late 2nd century BC. Tiberius proposed redistributing public land to poorer citizens. Political opponents killed him and many supporters. Gaius later promoted colonies, grain subsidies, judicial changes, and broader citizenship policies. He also died in political violence. Their deaths damaged restraints on domestic force. Political factions increasingly used intimidation, armed followers, prosecutions, and emergency decrees. Disputes over land, citizenship, military command, and the spoils of empire became connected with personal rivalries among leading families. Gaius Marius rose through military success and held the consulship an unprecedented number of times. He recruited soldiers from citizens with little property, a practice that strengthened the dependence of troops on commanders who could obtain pay, plunder, and land for them. Earlier Roman armies had already included poorer men during emergencies, but permanent overseas warfare increased the political importance of professional military service. Italian allies demanded Roman citizenship after generations of fighting in Roman armies. Their revolt in the Social War forced Rome to grant citizenship throughout much of Italy. The conflict expanded the Roman political community while devastating the peninsula. Lucius Cornelius Sulla marched his army on Rome during a dispute over command. After civil war, he became dictator and published lists of enemies who could be killed with legal impunity. Their property was confiscated and sold. Sulla rewrote parts of the constitution to strengthen the Senate, then retired. His example showed that a successful general could seize the state through loyal troops. Meanwhile, the Chinese state of Qin conquered its rivals and unified China in 221 BC. The first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, abolished many hereditary territories and divided the empire into administrative districts. Officials standardized weights, measures, coinage, axle widths, and forms of writing. Qin policies drew heavily from legalist ideas. The state imposed labor service, taxation, military conscription, and severe laws. Roads and defensive walls were connected and expanded. The emperor's immense tomb complex was guarded by thousands of life-sized terracotta soldiers. Qin rule collapsed soon after the first emperor's death in 210 BC. Rebellion spread under the pressure of labor demands, taxation, and political struggle. Liu Bang defeated his rivals and founded the Han dynasty in 202 BC. The Han retained much of the Qin administrative system while moderating some of its harsher features. Early emperors reduced taxes and allowed economic recovery. Under Emperor Wu, who ruled from 141 to 87 BC, the empire expanded into Central Asia, Korea, southern China, and northern Vietnam. Han armies fought the Xiongnu, a powerful confederation of mobile pastoral peoples north of China. Warfare alternated with diplomacy, trade, tribute, and marriage agreements. Chinese expansion into the West created stronger links with Central Asian states. These routes later became known collectively as the Silk Roads. Silk moved westward through chains of merchants, while horses, glassware, precious stones, spices, metals, artistic techniques, and religious ideas moved in several directions. Few traders traveled the entire distance from China to the Mediterranean. Goods changed hands repeatedly across oasis towns, mountain passes, steppe routes, and imperial frontiers. Han government recruited educated officials and increasingly favored Confucian learning. The Imperial Academy trained men in classical texts. Recommendations, examinations, family influence, and local reputation all played roles in official appointment. Confucian moral language coexisted with centralized law, taxation, and bureaucratic surveillance inherited from Qin practice. Sima Qian, the great Han historian, wrote a comprehensive account of China from legendary antiquity to his own time. He organized material through annals, chronological tables, treatises, hereditary houses, and biographies. His work established a model followed by later Chinese dynastic histories. After the fall of the Mauryan Empire around 185 BC, India divided among regional states. Greek-ruled kingdoms survived in parts of Afghanistan and northwestern India. Their rulers combined Greek and Indian forms in coinage, religion, art, and government. King Menanda became associated in Buddhist tradition with philosophical dialogue and conversion. Central Asian peoples, including the Sakas and Yuezhi, moved into regions once controlled by Hellenistic kingdoms. The Kushan Empire emerged from the Yuezhi and eventually controlled territory from Central Asia into northern India. Under rulers such as Kanishka, Kushan power supported commerce and Buddhist institutions. Gandharan artists represented Buddhist subjects using a mixture of Indian, Iranian, and Greco-Roman artistic forms. Images of the Buddha in human form became increasingly widespread. Buddhist monks and merchants carried texts and teachings along Central Asian trade routes toward China. In Iran and Mesopotamia, the Parthian Empire replaced much of Seleucid rule. Parthian aristocrats relied on cavalry, including armored horsemen and mounted archers. Their decentralized political structure allowed powerful regional families considerable autonomy. Parthia controlled important routes between the Mediterranean, Central Asia, and India. The Roman Republic's final century produced a succession of powerful commanders. Pompey defeated pirates, campaigned in the east, and reorganized Roman territories in Asia. Crassus gained enormous wealth and political influence but died during an invasion of Parthia at Carrhae in 53 BC. Julius Caesar built his reputation through politics, public spending, alliances, and military command. As governor in Gaul, he fought campaigns from 58 to 50 BC, conquering vast territories and enriching himself and his soldiers. His written account portrayed the wars as defensive and orderly, though Roman expansion drove much of the conflict. When the Senate ordered Caesar to surrender his command, he crossed the Rubicon River into Italy in 49 BC. Civil war followed. Pompey and many senators withdrew to Greece, where Caesar defeated them at Pharsalus. Pompey fled to Egypt and was killed. Caesar intervened in an Egyptian dynastic conflict and supported Cleopatra VII against her brother. Cleopatra was a Ptolemaic monarch who spoke Egyptian and several other languages, managed court politics, negotiated with Roman leaders, and sought to preserve her kingdom's independence. After further campaigns in Africa and Spain, Caesar returned to Rome as dictator. He expanded the Senate, reorganized provincial government, founded colonies, relieved some debts, and introduced the Julian calendar. His accumulation of permanent authority convinced opponents that monarchy was returning. A group of senators assassinated Caesar on March 15, 44 BC. They expected to restore republican government, but they lacked a stable political program and underestimated Caesar's popularity among soldiers and citizens. New civil wars followed. Caesar's adopted heir Octavian allied with Mark Antony and Lepidus. Their triumvirate defeated Caesar's assassins and conducted proscriptions against political enemies. The statesman and writer Cicero was among those killed. Octavian and Antony later divided the Roman world between them. Antony formed a political and personal partnership with Cleopatra. Octavian's propaganda portrayed the conflict as a defense of Rome against foreign monarchy, though it remained another Roman civil war. Octavian's forces defeated Antony and Cleopatra at Actium in 31 BC. Both died the following year, and Egypt became a Roman province. Octavian emerged as sole ruler. In 27 BC, the Senate granted him the title Augustus. He preserved republican offices and language while controlling the army, provinces, finances, and political system. This arrangement allowed Romans to accept monarchy without formally abandoning the republic. Augustus created a standing army with fixed terms of service and retirement payments. Most legions were stationed along the frontiers. An elite Praetorian Guard protected the emperor in Italy. A military treasury funded veterans, reducing their dependence on individual commanders. Provincial administration became more regular. Governors still possessed broad powers, and corruption continued, but imperial oversight could restrain extreme abuses. Local elites governed cities, collected taxes, funded public buildings, and represented their communities to Roman officials. Augustus promoted traditional religion, marriage, fertility, and family discipline. His legislation attempted to regulate adultery and encourage upper-class marriage. His own household remained troubled by rivalry, scandal, illness, and the deaths of intended heirs. Roman poets and historians shaped the cultural image of the new order. Virgil's Aeneid connected Rome with the legendary Trojan hero Aeneas and presented Roman history within a divine plan. Horace wrote lyric poetry that moved between private reflection and public themes. Livy composed a monumental history of Rome from its legendary beginnings. The empire established under Augustus included the Mediterranean coast, Western Europe, North Africa, the Balkans, Anatolia, Syria, and Egypt. Roman commanders continued expanding, though the destruction of 3 legions in the Teutoburg forest in AD 9 discouraged further conquest deep into Germany. Mediterranean shipping carried grain, wine, oil, pottery, metals, textiles, slaves, and luxury goods. Egypt and North Africa supplied enormous quantities of grain to Rome. Spanish mines produced silver and other metals. Roads connected military bases, towns, ports, and provincial capitals. Most inhabitants of the empire worked in agriculture. Their lives depended on rainfall, soil, rents, taxes, and local security. Urban monuments represented only one part of Roman civilization. Many villages retained local languages, customs, gods, and social structures beneath the institutions of imperial rule. Roman cities contained forums, temples, baths, theatres, amphitheatres, markets, fountains, workshops, apartment buildings, and elite houses. Aqueducts supplied water where geography and resources allowed. Sewers and drains improved sanitation, though disease remained widespread. Public baths combined hygiene, exercise, leisure, business, and social contact. Entertainment included drama, chariot racing, athletic displays, public executions, animal hunts, and gladiatorial combat. These spectacles displayed wealth and imperial authority, while providing occasions for crowds to express approval or anger. Slavery remained deeply embedded in the economy and household. Enslaved people came from warfare, piracy, birth, abandonment, and trade. They worked in every occupation from mining and farming to teaching, accounting, medicine, and administration. Legal treatment varied according to owner, occupation, and period. But slaves remained property under law. Manumission created a large population of freed people. Freedmen could gain wealth, conduct business, and participate in religious associations, though social prejudice and legal restrictions remained. Their children could enter the freeborn citizen population. Roman women lacked the same formal political rights as men, but could own property, inherit wealth, manage businesses, sponsor buildings, and influence family alliances. Legal changes during the late Republic and Empire gave many upper-class women greater control over their assets. Social expectations still centered heavily on marriage, household reputation, and motherhood. The first emperors after Augustus belonged to the Julio-Claudian family. Tiberius was an experienced commander and administrator, though his later withdrawal to Capri damaged relations with the Senate. Caligula's brief reign ended in assassination. Claudius expanded imperial administration and conquered much of Britain. Nero's rule collapsed after revolt and military rebellion in AD 68. The resulting year of civil war produced 4 emperors. Vespasian restored stability and founded the Flavian dynasty. His son Titus completed the Colosseum and ruled during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in AD 79, which buried Pompeii and Herculaneum. Domitian strengthened imperial government but alienated members of the Senate and was assassinated. Jewish communities lived throughout the Roman and Parthian worlds, In Judea, Roman taxation, local factionalism, religious tension, and resentment of foreign rule led to revolt in AD 66. Roman forces captured Jerusalem in AD 70 and destroyed the Second Temple. The loss of the temple transformed Jewish religious life. Rabbinic teachers emphasized study, prayer, law, and community institutions. Synagogues and scholarly networks helped maintain Jewish identity across dispersed populations. Christianity arose from Jewish religious traditions in the 1st century AD. Jesus of Nazareth preached in Galilee and Judea during the reigns of Augustus and Tiberius. His teachings concerned repentance, divine judgment, forgiveness, ethical conduct, and the coming kingdom of God. Roman authorities crucified Jesus under the governor Pontius Pilate. His followers proclaimed that he had risen from the dead and identified him as the Messiah. Small communities formed in Jerusalem and then spread through Syria, Anatolia, Greece, Egypt, Rome, and other regions. Paul of Tarsus played a major role in expanding the movement among non-Jews. He taught that faith in Christ allowed Gentiles to join God's people without fully adopting Jewish law. His letters addressed disputes over doctrine, worship, leadership, morality, and community discipline. Early Christians met in houses, shared meals, supported widows and the poor, and developed rituals of baptism and the Eucharist. Their refusal to sacrifice to traditional gods sometimes attracted suspicion. Persecution usually occurred locally or under particular emperors rather than continuously across the entire empire. During the 2nd century AD, Rome reached its greatest territorial extent. Trajan conquered Dacia and briefly occupied much of Mesopotamia. His successor Hadrian abandoned some eastern conquests and concentrated on consolidation. Hadrian's wall in Britain formed one part of a frontier system based on forts, roads, patrols, allied communities, and negotiated relations with neighboring peoples. Antoninus Pius presided over a long period of stability. Marcus Aurelius later faced invasion, war with Parthia, and epidemic disease. The Antonine Plague killed large numbers throughout the empire and weakened military recruitment, tax revenue, and local communities. Marcus Aurelius wrote philosophical reflections grounded in Stoicism, emphasizing duty, self-command, reason, and acceptance of events beyond personal control. His son Commodus proved unstable and was assassinated in AD 192, bringing the Antonine dynasty to an end. Roman citizenship gradually spread through the provinces. Military service, local office, imperial grants, and manumission extended legal status beyond Italy. In AD 212, Emperor Caracalla granted citizenship to nearly all free inhabitants of the empire. Regional identities continued, but Roman law and civic institutions became increasingly universal within imperial territory. Roman law developed through statutes, decrees, judicial rulings, legal opinions, and established procedure. Jurists examined contracts, inheritance, property, marriage, guardianship, and public authority. Their work later influenced the legal systems of Byzantium, medieval Europe, and many modern states. The Roman Empire remained connected with societies far beyond its borders. Merchants traveled through Red Sea ports to Arabia, Eastern Africa, and India. Roman coins have been found in South Asia, while spices, gems, ivory, textiles, and pepper reached Mediterranean markets. Chinese silk arrived through Central Asia and maritime routes. Mary remained a major power south of Egypt until the 4th century AD. Its rulers built pyramids, temples, reservoirs, and urban centers. The Meroitic script has been partly deciphered as a writing system, though the language is still imperfectly understood. The kingdom of Aksum rose in the highlands of Ethiopia and Eritrea. Its position connected the Nile Valley, Red Sea, Arabian Peninsula, and Indian Ocean commerce. Aksumite kings issued coins, erected monumental stelae, and controlled surrounding territories. King Ezana adopted Christianity during the 4th century. Across the Atlantic, complex American societies developed without direct contact with Eurasia or Africa. The Olmec civilization flourished in the Gulf Coast region of Mesoamerica from around 1500 BC. Olmec centers produced monumental stoneheads, ceremonial architecture, jade objects, and religious imagery that influenced later cultures. Zapotec civilization developed in the valley of Oaxaca. Monte Alban became a major city on a defensible hilltop, with temples, plazas, tombs, inscriptions, and evidence of conquest. In the Maya region, urban communities expanded during the first millennium BC and early centuries AD. Maya rulers governed city-states linked by diplomacy, trade, intermarriage, and warfare. Maya scribes developed a sophisticated writing system and recorded dynastic histories, rituals, and astronomical observations. Mathematicians used positional notation and a concept of zero. Calendrical systems coordinated ceremonies, royal anniversaries, and historical records. Teotihuacan grew in central Mexico during the early centuries AD and became one of the largest cities in the world. Its broad avenues, apartment compounds, temples, and pyramids required extensive planning. The city influenced distant Maya states and controlled important trade, including access to obsidian. In the Andes, societies developed irrigation, terracing, textiles, metalwork, and monumental architecture. The Nazca culture produced elaborate ceramics and enormous ground designs on the desert surface. The Moche built urban and ceremonial centers along the northern coast of Peru, supported by irrigation systems and ruled by powerful warrior priest elites. In North America, Hopewell communities constructed earthworks and burial mounds and participated in exchange networks carrying copper, shell, mica, and stone across great distances. Political structures varied widely, and many communities combined farming with hunting and gathering. During the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire entered a prolonged period of political and military instability. Emperors rose and fell rapidly, often elevated by armies and killed by rivals. Civil wars weakened frontier defenses. Germanic confederations attacked across the Rhine and Danube, while the Sasanian Persian Empire challenged Rome in the east. The Sasanians overthrew the Parthians in AD 224. Their kings created a more centralized Iranian state and presented themselves as heirs to ancient Persian monarchy. Zoroastrian institutions received royal support, though the empire included Christians, Jews, Manichaeans, Buddhists, and followers of other religions. The Persian king Shapur I defeated several Roman armies and captured Emperor Valerian in AD 260. Roman authority fractured. A Gallic empire controlled parts of the west, while Palmyra under Queen Zenobia gained power in the east. The Emperor Aurelian reunited the territories during the 270s. Economic disruption accompanied political crisis. Coinage lost silver content, prices rose, trade suffered in some regions, and repeated military recruitment burdened communities. Epidemic disease reduced populations, regional conditions varied, and many cities and estates continued functioning, but the imperial government struggled to maintain revenue and security. Diocletian seized power in AD 284 and reorganized the state. He established a system in which 2 senior emperors and 2 junior emperors governed different regions. This tetrarchy improved military response and succession planning for a time, though rivalry returned after Diocletian retired. The government expanded the number of provinces, separated military from civilian commands, and increased taxation. Assessments were tied more closely to land and population. Occupations and social status became increasingly regulated as the state tried to secure labor, soldiers, and revenue. Diocletian also launched the last great imperial persecution of Christians. Churches were destroyed, scriptures confiscated, and Christians pressured to sacrifice. Enforcement varied across the empire. The campaign failed to eliminate the religion. Constantine emerged victorious from renewed civil wars. Before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in AD 312, he associated his cause with the Christian God. The Edict of Milan in AD 313 established religious toleration and restored confiscated Christian property. Constantine granted privileges to churches, funded basilicas, and involved himself in disputes among bishops. The Council of Nicaea in AD 325 addressed controversy over the nature of Christ and affirmed that the Son shared the same divine substance as the Father. Doctrinal disputes continued for centuries, despite imperial attempts to impose unity. Constantine founded a new capital at Byzantium, renamed Constantinople, in AD 330. Its location controlled routes between Europe and Asia and provided access to the Black Sea and Eastern Mediterranean. The city received palaces, churches, forums, baths, walls, and a new senate. The empire of the 4th century differed from that of Augustus. The emperor appeared in more elaborate ceremonial settings. Administration had grown larger, taxation more demanding, and the army more divided among frontier troops and mobile field forces. Latin dominated the West, while Greek remained the principal language of the East. Christianity gained converts across social classes. Bishops became influential urban leaders, administering charity, resolving disputes, and negotiating with officials. Monasticism developed in Egypt and spread widely. Some Christians withdrew into deserts or isolated communities, seeking discipline through prayer, fasting, labor, and communal rules. Traditional religion retained millions of followers. Temples, household cults, philosophical schools, and local festivals continued. Religious change unfolded through patronage, law, preaching, family influence, destruction, adaptation, and gradual shifts in public expectation. Emperor Julian attempted to restore traditional cults during his brief reign from AD 361 to 363. His death during a Persian campaign ended the project. In AD 380, Theodosius I endorsed Nicene Christianity as the official faith of the imperial government. Later laws restricted sacrifice and weakened many traditional institutions. Beyond Rome, the Han dynasty had already collapsed in AD 220, after court factionalism, rebellion, military competition, and the rise of regional warlords. China divided among rival kingdoms. The Three Kingdoms period became famous in later literature, though its wars caused severe population loss and displacement. The Jin dynasty briefly reunified China in AD 280. Internal conflict soon weakened it, and northern China fragmented among states founded by several ethnic and military groups. Large numbers of people migrated south, where Chinese political and cultural centers expanded along the Yangtze. Buddhism grew rapidly in China during these centuries. Translators rendered Indian and Central Asian texts into Chinese. Monasteries offered teaching, ritual, charity, and community. Chinese Buddhists adapted foreign concepts to local philosophical language and social customs. In India, the Gupta dynasty rose during the 4th century AD. Gupta rulers controlled much of northern India through direct administration, alliances, tribute, and regional governors. Sanskrit court culture flourished, and Hindu religious traditions received strong royal patronage alongside Buddhism and Jainism. Mathematicians developed the decimal place value system and refined the use of zero. Astronomers calculated planetary movements and studied eclipses. Writers produced poetry, drama, legal texts, religious works, and scientific treatises. Political unity remained incomplete, with many regional rulers operating under varying degrees of Gupta influence. Roman frontiers had never been sealed boundaries. Trade, migration, diplomacy, intermarriage, recruitment, and warfare connected Romans with neighboring communities. Germanic soldiers served throughout the Roman army. Some rose to high command. Groups beyond the frontier adopted Roman weapons, coins, titles, and political practices. During the 4th century, the Goths became prominent north of the lower Danube and around the Black Sea. They consisted of several shifting coalitions rather than a single unified nation. Trade and conflict tied them closely to Rome. Christian missionaries converted many Goths, often to a form of Christianity later condemned by Nicene authorities as Arian. The Huns entered Eastern Europe during the later 4th century. Their attacks disrupted existing political arrangements and drove some Gothic groups toward Roman territory. In AD 376, large numbers of Goths requested permission to cross the Danube and settle inside the empire. Roman officials mishandled the refugees, exploiting them and failing to provide adequate food. Revolt followed. Emperor Valens confronted the Goths near Adrianople in AD 378 without waiting for reinforcements. The Roman army suffered a severe defeat, and Valens was killed. Theodosius I eventually reached a settlement allowing Gothic groups to live within the empire under their own leaders, while supplying soldiers. Similar arrangements became more common as imperial authorities struggled to recruit enough troops and manage displaced populations. After Theodosius died in AD 395, the empire was divided between his sons. Administrative division had occurred before, and contemporaries still regarded the empire as one political order under two courts. Over time, however, Eastern and Western governments developed increasingly separate military and financial interests. The eastern provinces contained wealthy cities, dense populations, and stronger tax revenues. Constantinople's position and defenses protected it from many attacks. The Western government faced longer frontiers, weaker revenues, repeated civil wars, and powerful generals competing for influence. In AD 401, the Gothic leader Alaric invaded Italy. Roman forces temporarily drove him back, but political conflict at court led to the execution of the capable general Stilicho in AD 408. Many of Stilicho's followers and allied soldiers then joined Alaric. Alaric's army besieged Rome and entered the city in AD 410. The sack shocked the Roman world because Rome retained enormous symbolic authority. Though it had not been the regular imperial capital for generations, the attackers looted for several days and then moved south. Other groups crossed into Roman territory. Vandals, Swabians, and Alans entered Gaul in AD 406 and later moved into Spain. The Visigoths eventually established a kingdom in southwestern Gaul and Spain under formal agreements with Roman authorities. The Vandals crossed from Spain into North Africa under King Gaiseric. They captured Carthage in AD 439 and seized one of the Western Empire's richest provinces. North African grain and tax revenue had long supported the Western government. Vandal naval power then threatened Mediterranean shipping. Attila united a powerful Hunnic coalition during the 5th century. The Eastern Empire paid tribute to avoid attacks. Attila later invaded Gaul and Italy. A Roman-led coalition, including Visigoths, fought him at the Catalonian plains in AD 451. The battle halted his advance in Gaul without destroying his army. Attila invaded Italy the following year but withdrew amid food shortages, disease, diplomatic pressure, and military concerns. He died in AD 453 and his coalition quickly fractured as subject peoples rebelled. The Western imperial government became dependent on military commanders who ruled through short-lived emperors. Roman generals, Germanic officers, court officials, senators, bishops, and regional landowners competed and cooperated according to circumstance. Political identity remained fluid. Many leaders who fought Rome also sought Roman titles and legal recognition. Gaiseric's Vandals sailed to Italy and sacked Rome in AD 455. The city endured extensive plunder, though later accounts exaggerated the destruction. Imperial authority survived for another 2 decades, largely confined to Italy and limited parts of Gaul. Britain had already slipped from effective Roman control early in the 5th century. Local rulers organized defense as imperial troops and officials disappeared. Anglo-Saxon settlement expanded in the east, while Romano-British communities maintained resistance in the west. Roman institutions declined unevenly, with some towns contracting rapidly and others preserving elements of older life. In Gaul and Spain, new kingdoms adopted parts of Roman administration, taxation, law, and Christian organization. Their rulers employed Roman officials and sought recognition from emperors. The senatorial aristocracy retained local influence through landholding and church office. The Eastern emperor remained the most prestigious source of Roman legitimacy. Eastern armies sometimes intervened in Western affairs, though their own conflicts with Persia, internal rivals, and Balkan invaders limited sustained assistance. In AD 476, the military commander Odoacer removed the young Western emperor Romulus Augustulus. Rather than appointing another emperor, he sent the imperial insignia to Constantinople and ruled Italy as king, while formally acknowledging the Eastern emperor. The separate Western imperial court had disappeared. The Roman Senate continued meeting, Roman law remained in use, and Roman landowners kept much of their property. Bishops maintained civic administration in many cities. Roads, aqueducts, estates, and tax systems survived where local authority could support them. Elsewhere, trade contracted, towns shrank, literacy declined, and political power became more localized. The Roman Empire itself continued in the east from Constantinople. Its inhabitants called themselves Romans, and their emperors claimed authority over the old imperial territories. Modern historians later called this state the Byzantine Empire, though that name was foreign to its people. It endured for nearly another 1,000 years. The ancient Mediterranean political order had changed beyond recovery. Western Europe was divided among kingdoms ruled by Goths, Vandals, Franks, Burgundians, Suebi, and other groups whose leaders combined military traditions with Roman law, Christianity, taxation, and aristocratic government. The Church preserved Latin learning and built institutions that crossed political boundaries. Across Asia, the Sasanian Empire remained a major power. The Gupta state still influenced northern India, and China remained divided between northern and southern dynasties. Aksum controlled important Red Sea connections. Teotihuacan and the great Maya cities flourished in the Americas. The political end of the Western Roman Empire formed one event within a much wider human history that had begun hundreds of thousands of years before the first city king, law code, or written chronicle.